The best way to learn a language? Immersion, living where the language is spoken and using it every day. But if that's not in the cards for you this year, you can still learn a language the second best way, and that's with Babbel. Be a better you in 2024 with Babbel, the science-backed language learning app that actually works. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Babbel's tips and tools are approachable, accessible, rooted in real-life situations, and delivered with conversation-based teaching so you're ready to practice what you've learned in the real world. For instance, I've been using Babbel's convenient courses to help me learn basic conversational skills in German while I'm getting ready for a little trip I'm planning. It's not a language I'd ever studied before, but I find the lessons really easy and kind of like hand-holding me through learning a completely new language to me. And it's reassuring to know that with the help of Babbel, I'll be able to greet people, order food, and ask for directions without having to consult language apps while I'm in Deutschland. I'm still learning. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/vulgar. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/vulgar, spelled BABBEL.com/vulgar. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hello, I'm Alison Larkin, writer, comedian, narrator, and host of the Jane Austen podcast. Join me as we embark on a journey through Austen's timeless stories, starting with Pride and Prejudice. The Jane Austen podcast with Alison Larkin is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, Tits Out Brigade. It's me, Anne. I wanted to let you know about a fundraiser that I'm doing all this month, the month of April 2023. Trans rights are under attack seemingly everywhere, particularly in the United States. That's been in the news lately, but it's an issue all over the place. And I, as a person, and this podcast as an entity, we stand with all trans people everywhere. And so to raise some money, I'm running this fundraiser all month called Tits Out for Trans Rights. So you can get all the details if you go to vulgarhistory.com/donate. That's vulgarhistory.com/donate. It's two-pronged, the fundraiser. So first of all, I'm raising money for the Trevor Project, which is an American organization that supports LGBTQ plus people. And then also I've got a new item in the merch store, which is an item featuring trans icon, the Chevalier Dayon, who I talked about in an episode last season with guest host Maya Dean. And all the proceeds from sales of the Chevalier Dayon merchandise this month is going to be donated to Point of Pride, which is another American organization that helps support trans people. If there's another organization that you're planning to support this month anyway, somewhere close to home, something that is meaningful to you that supports trans people, there's a form also on my website where you can just list what the donation was and who you gave the money to. So at the end of the month, I can give a grand total of how much the Tits Out Brigade was able to raise as part of this fundraiser. Also, for everybody who wants to, I will give you a shout out to all the people who donate in a later episode of Vulgar History. So again, you can get all the details of this fundraiser at vulgarhistory.com/donate. Tits Out for Trans Rights. Hello, and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and this is an episode in the season There's Something About Mary, Queen of Scots. This is part 2 of Catherine de' Medici, who was Mary, Queen of Scots' one-time mother-in-law, and that's like number 25 on the list of most interesting things about Catherine de' Medici. But I did want to say, if this is the first time I've ever listened to this podcast, like you should probably listen to part 1 first. This is very much the second part of what is going to be a 3-part conversation. And also the way that the season is going, I explained this earlier, but I'm going to keep explaining it because, we're in it and it's worth re-explaining. So I'm going to talk about somebody from Mary Queen of Scots' story and her life. And that's going to be, maybe one episode, maybe two, maybe three. And then the Wednesday, and those are all on Wednesdays. Then the Wednesday after that, I'm going to do a super special while I take a break and just prepare for the next one. Then we're going to dive into the next Mary Queen of Scots adjacent related person. So you can always tell if it's going to be an episode in this Mary Queen of Scots saga because the episodes they're just going to be a person's name. The super special episodes always say super special beforehand. So if you really want to just follow the Mary Queen of Scots story, you can just listen to these ones. And when it's a super special, you can save those for another time for yourself. But this is just a way. There's so many books that are coming out, so many authors I want to talk to and about. And some of the themes in them really overlap with just everything we always talk about in this podcast. Anyway, so if you're feeling like, whoa, this is like a scattered and random assortment of episodes, especially now that we're having these like Friday bonus episodes, which are also super special author chats. It's a lot. Why am I doing this? Because I have so much to say. But if you really want to just like really vibe with the Mary Queen of Scots of it all, listen to the Wednesday episodes, look for the ones that don't say super special on them. And that way you can just kind of get that story sequentially. But yeah, so again, I'm joined by Lana Wood-Johnson to talk about Catherine de Medici. This is the part 2. What's the middle Star Wars movie? Is it the Empire Strikes Back? This is like the part 2. Part 3 is where things are gonna like really hit the fan. Although I guess Catherine de Medici's life is like perpetually just in the fan. But this is the middle part of what's going to be 3 Catherine de Medici episodes. And so, I mean, without further ado, here's me and Lana from the past. Hooray. Like, divorce no longer in the cards. Like Catherine's place cemented. She not just had a child, it was a son.
And she had lots of sons.
She did.
That survived their infancy and childhood.
And you know what? She did her job.
Just part of the problem.
They didn't do their job.
She did her job.
They were like trademark vulgar history, useless sons. So somebody asked when I was asking about the Marie de Guise episode, because it is a common thing on this podcast to have like a woman who's a queen and fights tooth and nail and does amazing to like get her son a good position, and the son is terrible and useless. Somebody was like, do Marie de Guise's younger brothers count as useless sons? And I was like, it is a similar vibe. It's a similar vibe. Like someone...
No.
But it's not the same thing.
The youngest brothers. The youngest brothers. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, the youngest brothers. I mean, they were spares. They were sitting around doing nothing, literally.
The guys who didn't help her when she was in trouble. No, the uncles.
They're totally going to get there. Yes, the uncles. Sorry. Context. Yes.
The uncles.
The uncles. The capital U uncles.
The de Guise uncles, like they were here for it. The Marie de Guise's youngest brothers, useless. So the king of France died. Henry becomes king, which is like, surprise, like your one brother died in a pillow fight. Your other brother died in a tennis-related accident. I guess it's you.
I don't know if the tennis brother was in line, but yes, I'm pretty sure that's how he died.
On Rain, which I know you haven't watched, there's a part where before the Henry character dies, he's haunted by a man carrying a tennis racket. And I was like, who is this tennis racket ghost? Anyway, so I just always remember that brother died in a tennis accident because his ghost haunted him carrying a tennis racket. So Catherine is now Queen of France. But Diane has been the mistress for so long. And she's also been, like Diane, she's been the mistress for so long, and she's also been in French court for even longer because she was 38 when she became the mistress. So she has so many connections and stuff. She had more political influence. Often, like when there's an official procession, it was like Henry and Catherine, and Diane was right behind looking better and more glamorous. She sort of acted as queen, like at official engagements and stuff. And she was given, notably, the Chateau de Chenonceau, which is a beautiful residence Catherine had wanted for herself. And this becomes a big... And then I think it was decorated with the intertwining initials of Henry and Diane.
I was wrong, and I want to clarify this.
Yeah.
Younger brother had the pillow fight.
Younger brother. Okay.
Older brother probably died of tuberculosis
after playing tennis,
but he died so fast that they think after the tennis, like he played around a tennis, asked for a cup of water, which was brought to him, and then after drinking it, he collapsed and died several days later.
Yeah, so people are like, did he overexert himself in tennis?
But there's also, that's where the first poisoning rumor comes in. Did Catherine de Medici poison him?
You're right, because when the tennis brother died, then suddenly Henry is heir to the throne. And so it's like, okay, Catherine, it's like, we know she's using herbal remedies for like pregnancy reasons, which like a lot of women were. But it's also, she's from...
And she was interested in poisons and had a poison buddy.
Yeah, if you've read the Flavia de Luce mysteries, it's about a little girl who's interested in poisons. Catherine de Medici has that vibe. She's just like really interested in poisons in like a scientific way. She also really liked, I'm not sure if this is at the point in which Nostradamus is on the scene, but like she had like soothsayers and prognosticators. Like she really liked talking to sort of like spiritual advisors.
Yeah.
Which didn't help with the whole witchcraft poisoning rumors.
Correct.
And so can we talk about the flying squadron?
Oh, are we there yet? Okay.
I'm not sure if they're there yet, but I think they must have been.
I thought they were later.
I'm not sure when they show up.
Let me figure that out.
Well, because I'm just thinking, because the next thing I have in my notes is Henry dies. But I know that Catherine was like doing stuff before that, right?
I know for sure that the flying squadron existed during the whole Margot situation.
Okay, so at some point, Catherine she has a group of sexy lady spies who work for her, and they're called the Flying Squadron. And the reason they're called the Flying Squadron is because Catherine is the one who introduced ballet to France, which when we get to significance scoring, like ballet is such a major thing in France, and she was the one who brought it there. And so they're called the Flying Squadron, named after the kind of ballet dancing, when you're doing a lift and stuff. So that's why. And they were just kind of like sexy lady spies so her ladies in waiting were also spies. And they would like sleep with people to get information and stuff. So like, well, Diane has this built-in sort of influence circle of like other aristocrats and people she knows. Catherine is just like getting the goods on everybody through her lady spies. I found a good description of it.
I mean, she grew up in the Vatican, and information is one of the most valuable tools when you're Vatican politics is like just who knows what dirt about who. And so she learned the value of that pretty early on.
Yeah, and she's been here for whatever by now, 15 years or something. Like I'm sure if it's not officially the Flying Squadron known as a Flying Squadron, she has eyes and ears. She has spies.
Well, and Diane was acting like basically the queen, the proper queen who did all of the appearances and stuff. So she had not a lot to do.
Yeah.
So she was just very slowly, very quietly amassing power and influence and knowledge.
Exactly. So at this point, I think perhaps Catherine, like she's doing all this stuff, but stealthily in the de Medici way. While people are just like, oh, poor Catherine, she's just like having babies and like being overshadowed by Diane. But meanwhile, Catherine is secretly so smart and just like developing.
Well, and she's using that same de Medici, like get in good with the artists, because people say stuff around artists that they don't treat them like people. And so that's one of the other parts of the Flying Squadron was like that they were ballerinas, that they were artists, that they were very talented women that people wanted to sleep with. That they didn't think of as nobles, but they were special and pretty and good. And so she knew how to get in good with artists, being a de Medici.
Exactly. So this is kind of like, I don't know how many episodes this is going to be again, but I feel like Henry dying could be end part 1. Tune in next time. But so Catherine's just like stealthily in the shadows developing power. And then Henry died in 1559 of what I describe as a joust-related eye/brain injury.
He got a giant splinter lodged in his eye and it went straight through his skull.
He was jousting.
It was gross.
He was jousting and the lance, it's called a lance, went like punctured his skull. Which is, so in the Estelle Parenque book, she was describing this. And so Catherine had been seeing, I forget if it's Nostradamus or another one of her like little helper guys, but she had gotten a fortune told that said that Henry was going to die when he was 40 and it was going to be basically eye related or something like that. So she was just kind of like, she's a very superstitious person. And Henry like is 40. And then she's like, well, it's cool though, because like he doesn't joust, he's the king. And then Henry's like, guess what? I'm going to have a joust. And she's like, what? And so he
Dion thinks it's a good idea.
Dion was literally cheering him on. So he was jousting against one guy and he was knocked off. And everyone's like, Catherine's like, maybe you should stop. Like, maybe you should not do this. And Dion's like, no, keep going. And Henry's like, yeah, I'll keep going. And then he jousted against the same guy. And that's where the lance went. It was described as just like blood pouring out of his head, blood pouring out of his eye socket. Like the lance pierced his skull and some pieces of the lance were like lodged in his eyeball. So then they brought in a doctor, but it's like, what's he going to do? You know, he didn't wash his hands.
It's making it worse. Just going straight to sepsis.
They were doing something with like egg whites. Anyway, he died.
Because egg whites are so clean.
I don't know. They were just kind of figuring it out. So suddenly Henry dies. Like this was not in anybody's plan. And so the new king is 15-year-old Francis,
who is married
to
Mary, Queen of Scots.
Okay, so this is where Catherine steps in as the power behind the crown. And so we're going to backtrack a bit. So Mary, Queen of Scots grew up alongside Catherine's like 6 children. Mary, Queen of Scots, as we talked about in the Marie de Guise episode, she was married to Francis. Like, where they're betrothed to each other. And so Mary Queen of Scots grew up in this court around Catherine pre-Henry dying, right?
For years, not just like showed up the day before. Like she was in that family for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. So she grew up, she and Mary and Francis were like, apparently they got along really well. That like in terms of like a marriage, it's like 2 people who enjoy each other. Like she grew up alongside the princes and princesses, but also she grew up seeing the example of Catherine de Medici.
Charles had a crush on her.
So Mary is on the scene, and also on the scene are Mary's uncles, the de Guises.
Because they're never not.
No. So they're like, this is great. The king is dead, or like Francis is the king. Mary, Queen of Scots, is now Queen of Scotland and France. And this is where I think she and Francis started wearing like outfits to declare like, basically she's the Queen of England too. Don't worry about it. Which was very controversial.
Yeah, that was very much a de Guise thing.
No, so here's the thing. So Mary, Queen of Scots is in France. She's growing up in the court of Catherine de Medici. So she's seeing and potentially learning how to be sneaky and how to be schemy. But also the de Guise uncles are there, like, you know, figuring things out for her, like cutting deals for her and stuff. And as Francis becomes king, Mary is not just like, oh, it's not like he's a king and she's just kind of the wife. It's like, no, she's the wife. And also her uncles are the de Guise uncles. And they start they get every important job. Like they kick out the previous people. And suddenly it's like de Guise everywhere you can look. Like every important role is like a de Guise is in the job.
As I've said many, many, many times before, I don't know how the narrative of, oh, poor sweet Mary, Queen of Scots, what a victim, how sad her life was, can exist when she's raised by the de Guises and Catherine de Medici.
Yeah.
like all of her influences in life are just the sneakiest, shadiest people that are all working every single angle of every single problem to their advantage.
Exactly. And it's crucial, I think. This is an understanding I now understand better, and you've told me about this before, but now since I read the Estelle Prank book, I understand it better, how involved the de Guises became when Francis and Mary became Queen and King of Scotland.
Because technically the de Guises are the regents. Like Catherine's not even the regent yet. She's trying it, but she's not there yet.
No, because the de Guises are so influential and so powerful, and they're men, right? And they're not from Florence.
But Catherine did the smart thing and actually raised her own kids.
Yeah.
And so her kids are all very dependent upon her in a way that most royal kids are not. Again, with the whole, if your mother's one thing, that doesn't count. Like Catherine counted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Her children were absolutely loyal to her. And Francis was old enough to rule on his own. He was 15 years old, but he was also sickly, is the descriptor that he often is given. Well, here's the thing. She had raised her children to be dependent on her, too dependent on her. She'd raised her children.
Too dependent.
Yeah. So they were dependent on her, but not really with their own person. Like, anyway, because she wanted to have more power. So she wasn't given an official role in her son's government, but What I wrote here is her influence was clear in the language of his official documents, which mentioned her as a sort of co-regent, even though she wasn't technically. But here's what she did. Here's what she was able to do. Henry is dead, so guess who's kicked out of everything? Diane. Diane was forced by Catherine to return her jewels. Catherine was able to take over that chateau that Diane had been given. So Diane is just she's gone. She's got no power anymore. Her power is entirely dependent on being the mistress of the king, and now she's not. And Catherine is,
Basically, anything that the Guises didn't care about, Catherine got to be in charge of.
Yes.
She got her way on anything that the Guises didn't care about. And Diane was one of the things they did not care about. Treat your mistress however you want.
Yeah. So, au revoir, Diane. Don't let the door hit you on the way out sort of vibes. So there were some religious wars.
We're in charge now. Let's kill Protestants. This is the De Guise family motto.
The De Guises were very Catholic in a way that involved a series of massacres of Protestants. And when they went in and, for instance, just massacred, a whole church full of Protestants, then that tended to lead to civil war, or what I call a tumultuous period of religious instability.
I mean, that's a polite way to say it. That's how the De Guises like it.
So Catherine herself initially supported just sort of don't ask, don't tell sort of vibe, where she's I'll let she was cool with the Protestants worshiping in their own way as long as they didn't take up weapons against them.
She was smart.
Yeah.
Protestants, you don't make Protestants martyrs. Number one rule, don't make Protestants martyrs. If they're just a quiet little subsect, they aren't going to do a whole lot. And it's not going to be that big of a deal. But the De Guises are never give up, never surrender.
The De Guises are just let's go kill some Protestants again today.
Catholic or else.
You're not Catholic, we will murder all of you.
Which is funny that she's related to popes. They're only related to cardinals, and they're just all in.
Yeah. So Catherine had it's interesting. It's interesting that they were there bringing this murderous Catholic energy, and she was kind of more moderate. And I don't know if that's just they already had that position, so she had to take a different position, or it's more just kind of she was more not resilient, but just malleable, flexible. She could kind of see what's going to work well here.
It's a very much Machiavellian standard is don't give your enemy more power than they have. If they're not doing anything to you, they're not worth your energy. So the De Guises were her enemy. The De Guises were doing things limiting her power, limiting her influence. The Huguenots were just there.
Yeah. And again, the Huguenots, I just want to clarify, the Huguenots is the word for French Protestants.
Yeah. The sect of French Protestantism that my husband's family is actually descended from.
Is there a tumultuous period of religious instability in your household from that?
Ironically, that side of the family his side of the family is actually Catholic, but they were descended of Huguenots. And I thought that was kind of hilarious. He doesn't understand that because he is a humanist and was when I met him. So he's he doesn't even remember what his parents were or his grandparents, but it's really funny to me. No, but the Huguenots were they're kind of ascetic, opposite. Usually Protestantism is a reaction to the level of Catholicism that you have in the country. And so the Catholics were very intense and showy. So the Huguenots were really quiet and just small churches and that kind of thing.
Well, and they're sort of in the Queen Margot movie, dressed kind of like oldie time pilgrims.
Yeah.
The Catholics are red and gold and luxury and lace and jewelry and crowns. And the Huguenots are just we wear black suits.
Yeah, they're very reserved. We're not like those people. We're quiet and we're normal. And they didn't have any martyrs until the De Guises came around to make them some martyrs.
I'm really understanding more and more how the De Guises just really fucked everything up for Mary. Specifically here. So, but then also there's the Bourbon brothers, Prince Louis of Condé and Antoine of Navarre.
Her cousins.
Whose cousins?
Mary's cousins? The De Guises' cousins?
The Bourbons were the de Guises cousins?
The Bourbons were cousins of the de Guises.
Okay.
Remember, through Antoinette.
Oh, Antoinette de Bourbon. Yeah.
Those are her brother's kids and grandkids.
Okay, so we've got the Bourbon brothers, if you're American, the Bourbon brothers. Prince Louis of Condé and Antoine of Navarre were they were in the...
Conde?
I
think so. Never mind.
I don't know.
As we've said, neither one of us really knows French. We just know what people have told us in French.
Here's what I know. On the TV show Reign, there was a character who's called Condé. So, whatever.
Yeah. I just remember a French professor who probably was not French. But it is Condé Nast.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. So the Bourbon brothers / the de Guise family were just like refusing to keep the peace. They were just like killing Huguenots everywhere. Catherine had Prince Louis, the Bourbon, brought to court and imprisoned. He was sentenced to... Wait, do you know anything about this?
I'm sorry. The Bourbons were on the Huguenot side.
Oh, interesting.
They were Huguenot aligned.
Oh, okay. So so it's cousin versus cousin.
And they were not keeping peace.
Got it. So...
Because remember, as always, I know what to do with Anne. Bring it back to Margot. Henry of Navarre was a Bourbon.
Margot's husband, yes. Okay.
Yes, and he was Huguenot aligned.
Right, because he wore the black suit. Okay, so here we've got family versus family. We've got the Bourbons,
yes,
which is Louis and Antoine, and they're just like, stop killing us. And we've got the de Guises, their cousins, being like, we will never stop killing you.
Also called Louis.
Here's the thing. Everyone in the story is called Louis and or Henry.
Yes.
So Catherine is like, Huguenots are cool as long as you don't fight back. And Louis and Antoine were like, well, you keep killing us, ergo we will fight back. So Catherine had Louis brought to court and imprisoned. He was sentenced to be put to death for offenses against the crown, and he would have been killed, ... except Francis, the little sickly king, died while Louis was in jail.
Not of tuberculosis.
He died of an ear infection, which sounds like I, as a child, had ear infections, and I remember how much the pain of that, like the pain inside your head. So apparently Francis, like just the descriptions I was reading, he was in such agony for quite a while with this ear infection.
His doctor didn't give him antibiotics.
Because they hadn't.
And your doctor did.
Yeah. His doctor, I don't know, he was like, egg whites. I don't know. So he...
Let's bleed him.
Yeah, I don't know. Ear infection is just like, that's beyond the ability of these shitty doctors.
It is an out of balance of the humors.
And now we're just going to take a break for a word from our sponsors.
As a podcast network, our first priority has always been audio and the stories we're able to share with you. But at Realm, we also sell some pretty cool merch, and organizing that was made both possible and easy with Shopify. When you think about successful businesses like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, an often overlooked secret is the business behind the business that makes selling and, for shoppers, buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. That's because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret that's definitely worth talking about is that Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%. That's more happy customers and way more sales going. If you're hoping to grow your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more, sell on Shopify. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/realm, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/realm to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/realm.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, a founder of the Go Kid Go network. At Go Kid Go, putting kids first is at the heart of every show that we produce. That's why we're so excited to introduce a brand new show to our network called The Search for the Silver Lining, a fantasy adventure series about a spirited young girl named Isla who time travels to the mythical land of Camelot. Look for The Search for the Silver Lining on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.
People often look at me with confusion when I ask them what their only one in the room story is. They think it has to be like mine, where I went to a 600-person event and discovered that I was the only Black person there. I know. Horrifying, right? Hi, I'm Laura Cathcart-Robbins, and I am the host and creator of the podcast Only One in the Room. Every week, my co-host Scott Slaughter and I invite you to join us for an hour and lose yourself in someone's only one story. This podcast is for anyone who's ever felt alone in a room full of people, which is to say that this podcast is for everyone.
And we're back. Yeah. So he was really sick. Catherine was really she was really attached to her children. She is very emotionally involved with her children in a way that not a lot of mothers that I've talked about on the show have been. So she was, personally devastated that her son was in pain and clearly dying, but also she was just like, this is gonna, like, her husband only recently just died. Like, now he's gonna die. Like, what's this gonna mean for her? Like, it was a whole crisis. And we're going to pause, get back to what that means in a second, to Mary, Queen of Scots, now the widow, the teen widow of King Francis. But I just want to get back to the Bourbon brothers. So Louis is in jail. He would have been killed, but then Francis dies. So, sensing an opportunity, Catherine makes a pact with Louis's brother Antoine that said, like, I'll release Louis if you promise that the Bourbons will stop fucking shit up. And Antoine agreed. And due to the success of this negotiation, Catherine was given a job title that's basically governor of France. It's like a new made-up title just for her. She was called Gouvernante de France. So with this title, she essentially matched Elizabeth I as a ruling queen. She was 41 years old, and the new king was her 9-year-old son.
And that does tie back to Mary, because the de Guises were no longer related to the royal family or the royal couple.
This is huge for Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yeah. So I blame everything on the de Guise brothers, but that's just me.
I do too now. I understand why you say that. So what happened was, Francis died. Mary, Queen of Scots is now a widow. And suddenly...
a young widow, like 14, 15.
Yeah, she's like a teen widow, and she's just kind of there like, okay, what's going to happen now? But her uncles had burned so many bridges with Catherine. Like, her uncles, like, Catherine hated them so much because they had, like, she knew their power. She knew that they wanted more power. And she was just like, these de Guise guys, get the fuck out of here.
Well, and they were violent with it. Like, they were causing problems in France that didn't have to exist because they got a little bit of power. Like, they were not good people.
No, the de Guise brothers were like, they took, because their niece was the Queen of France, they took every job. And then with her assent, she was cool with it, they just started having lots of power and control. And Catherine was just like, not on my watch. So, like, she made this deal that neutralized the Bourbon threat. She got this job, gouvernante of France, and the new king...
basically making her regent.
Yeah, basically regent, because the new king was her second son, Charles, who is 9 years old. And I have to say, useless. So here's the thing. So Mary, Queen of Scots, what does this mean for her? So she, the de Guises were like, well, what if you marry Charles to Mary, Queen of Scots, and then she can be Queen of France again?
And Charles was down for it.
Charles had such a crush on her. Charles loved her.
and this is that moment. Now, keep in mind, like, no one, yes, they married people, nobles married each other very, very young, but zero people expected them to actually start producing heirs until they were much older. Like, there was no expectation. You marry young for political alliances, but the production of heirs starts happening when it is reasonable and rational. No one is expecting a 9-year-old and an 18-year-old to have a kid.
Yeah. No, and honestly, so if they had this happen, so had a 9-year-old married an 18-year-old, they'd wait until he was 16, and she was in her 20s, and maybe, it's like, this is still workable. This could work. Unlike some of the marriages that Catherine later proposes between her teenage children and the 45-year-old Elizabeth I. But we'll get to that.
Look, it worked for Elisabetta.
Who's Elisabetta?
The oldest daughter have you forgotten this?
Yes.
The oldest daughter of Catherine de' Medici
who married the...
was married off to one Philip II of Spain. And it was at 15, and it was the love of his life. Philip finally found the love of his life. It was a 15-year-old. They were desperately in love, like creepy and wrong. He was like, what, 50 or something? She was supposed to marry his daughter or his son. And he's like, no, I'm keeping her for myself. And they were like desperately in love with each other. Like he was like a teenager. She was actually a teenager.
And that's the same Philip who was married to Mary I. Like Philip from the Armada.
Yes.
The one who like drove Mary I insane by being a horrible husband to her. Yeah.
The creepiest dude ever there was. And he finds the love of his life in a 15-year-old. Of course he does.
But this is crucial. Oh, here. So let's see. I have some stuff about her children, but Catherine had sort of a goal. She had all these children. She had 6 surviving children. And her plan was to marry them off to various other monarchs of other European countries so that her bloodline would be in power everywhere. And so, step 1 of that was marrying Elizabeth to the King of Spain. And yeah, so Mary Queen of Scots. So there was, the de Guises were like, okay, so if you're not going to marry Mary to your son Charles, what if we marry Mary to Philip's son, Don Carlos, who is insane?
He's very not able to function as a normal member of society.
Don Carlos does appear in Reign. And when I was like, who's this? And I'm like, actually, this is a borderline accurate portrayal of Don Carlos, who just had various, I think he had a head injury.
He was severely inbred.
Yeah.
He had a little bit too much Habsburg in him.
He was not the number 1 bachelor in Europe.
His genetics did him 0 favors.
Yeah. Let me see. I'm just looking up Don Carlos. There's an opera called Don Carlos. And that's what a lot of the first was. Anyway, Don Carlos, not a catch in terms of like him as a person. But if Mary Queen of Scots had married the son of the King of Spain, then that would maybe be good for the de Guises, because then she would, and here's another sliding doors moment. What if that happened?
All right. We know that Charles can have kids. We know that Mary can have sons, has a proclivity towards sons. If they both actually genuinely like each other.
Mm-hmm.
This is my sliding glass doors moment.
I know. So if Mary had married Charles, Catherine de' Medici's son Charles, then like follow this through, Lana. So what would have happened and what would have not happened if these two had gotten together?
So first of all, Charles wouldn't have gone around licking books.
I'm sorry. Can you explain that, please?
Do you remember that? And Queen Margot, when Catherine had the poison book and he was like licking his fingers and turning the pages. And of course they were all poisoned because it was fanfic, evil fanfic.
And then the movie Queen Margot, yes. And then he dies of blood in his sweat. He sweaty blood. He's so much sweat blood.
He probably wouldn't have had as many diseases, because if he was desperately devoted to his wife, he wouldn't have had mistresses. So then let's pretend they can have as many kids as they want. She's still in France. She's away from all of the nonsense of the nonsense she created in Scotland. Let's be real. You'll get to that later.
I will. But like if Mary hadn't returned to Scotland, her brother would have just continued on as the regent there? Like who would be in charge of?
Correct.
Yeah. And it would just be like various illegitimate sons.
James would have never been King of England.
James wouldn't have existed.
James would never have existed. There would be no King James version of the Bible. There would be no Stuart line. There would be no combination. Like, if England somehow managed to overcome Scotland and France, probably what would have happened is that one of their younger sons would have ended up inheriting France or inheriting Scotland, and Scotland would have remained a cadet state of France for as long as it could. Who knows what that history would look like? But we're talking about the English translation of the Bible would have, who knows when that would have happened, or if there would have been, like all of the Scottish witch purgings that happened.
Well, and then the way that inspired the witch trials and then the colonies in America, there was like Jamestown and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's the ripple effects become too huge for me to even quantify.
This one decision by Catherine fundamentally changes not just England and Scotland and France. It fundamentally changes the course of world history, because it's not long after this that England starts its colonial expansion. And part of that colonial expansion is attempts to legitimize their rule and their claim to power, because it goes from the Stuarts, who took and lost power, to girls, to Hanovers, like, who are basically Germans. Like, they're barely even English. They're just Germans. So Elizabeth goes to her second choice of heir, who may have had a far more stable bloodline because it's farther away from internoble marriage. Like, who knows what the history of the world would look like without these three countries and their instability. There would be no Bourbon line.
Oh my God, then there wouldn't be the Louis, like the Versailles. Yeah.
Correct. So again, this period of France, the dukes have far more influence. They have a lot of influence on the way that France is run. So much influence that Louis XIV, by the time Louis XIV comes around, who is raised in all of the different things, he like centralizes power in himself by forcing the dukes to spend all of their money to keep up with him. And so they can't spend time back at their home bases. They can't like maintain their power bases strongly. So like that leads to the centralization of power in the king, which leads to the French Revolution. So
which leads to Napoleon, which leads to
correct. Yeah. Which makes Allison happy. If there's no Napoleon, then Allison's life is better.
Then there's no FBI.
There's no FBI. For those who don't know, the original Bureau of Investigations was started by, I believe it was Charles Bonaparte, who was the grandnephew of Napoleon.
Yeah. This is like people are always like, what if we kill Hitler? Which is like, yes, there would be some understandable changes to history as well. But this is like, the world would be unrecognizable.
Yeah. It has the potential to be unrecognizable. Like, there's a lot of things that could have still happened that could have brought things back into alignment. But a small change in the bloodlines of France and England fundamentally changes the course of history in a way that you can't predict.
And this is all because the de Guise brothers were so power hungry when Mary was queen that Catherine was just like, there is 0% chance I'm going to let Mary marry my son Charles. That will never happen.
Yep. Yeah. So shipped her back home, and thus history unfolded the way it did. Like, there are a lot of sliding glass door moments in the course of history, but there are few that are this like fundamental. Like, who knows what language you and I would be speaking now?
Yeah.
Or if we definitely wouldn't exist. But like, I'm so German that I might still exist. But I might be speaking German. I might be speaking French, because like you would probably be speaking French, because who knows if this.
Yeah, because my ancestors were Scottish, and if Scotland became sort of cadet state of France.
Yeah, Canada was more French than it was English, and so let's play as Scottish Canadians in France. French and Scottish have their own colony. Like, imagine, you'd probably be speaking French, and I would probably be speaking German.
And it's. Like, I love that this is I had never thought about all of this until you mentioned it to me for the first time. And now just spelling it out, it's just like the entire post, 1600 history of Scotland, England. And I mean, all the countries that England affected, right? The whole colonial empire.
Yeah.
But then also France, just the French Revolution inspired other revolutions in other places that maybe would have happened or not. Anyway, it's just mind-boggling.
Well, and if the French Revolution destabilized France to the point that Napoleon could take over, and then that all of the other countries of the world could be invaded, like all the countries of Europe could be invaded.
Why does everything come back to the Louisiana Purchase?
Why does everything come back to Louisiana? I like living in the Louisiana Purchase, okay? It was you I was talking to. Yes, of course. It was you I was talking to about the Louisiana Purchase. Okay.
No, like it came up when I did the Napoleon episode with Allison, and then you were telling me something else, and I'm like, wait, this is also to do with we were talking about Lewis and Clark.
Lewis and Clark and Sacagawea.
Yeah, and then which later episode, listeners. Anyway,
spoilers.
So this is a crucial moment. This is like Catherine. The de Guise brothers were like, let's just marry Mary to your son Charles. And Catherine, who had been spending all this time like in the background, maybe the de Guises didn't take her seriously or whatever, but she had consolidated enough power. She's now the governor. She was the government of France. And she suddenly had more power than they did. And she wasn't going to do what they were going to say, because then she knew that they would get power
again. She made the
again.
right choice for herself.
Yeah.
She absolutely made the right choice.
She did. And that's what she was making. And she made the right choice for her son as well.
Well, I don't know that she made the right choice for Charles. I will disagree that she made the right choice for Charles. She made the right choice for herself and probably France.
Yeah. Charles was just sort of like, I don't know, an accessory. He wasn't really.
Poor Charles.
Yeah.
Poor Charles.
No, but then the other thing in terms of Mary Queen of Scots is that the de Guises were like, okay, if she can't marry Charles, then let's marry her to Don Carlos, the aforementioned inbred insane person, son of Philip. And that would have also had trickle effects we don't need to get into. But, at this point, there's like Spain, England, France, and it's just kind of like who's allied with who. And a lot has to do with who's Catholic and who's Protestant. So if the de Guises had gotten in with Spain, then that would also have changed a lot of things if Mary became Mary Queen of Spain.
But she still would. But part of her not marrying not marrying Don Carlos was that Catherine basically said, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And so she had to go home because like Spain's like, okay, well, we'll talk about it. But she goes home and she basically gets kidnapped immediately.
So Mary
does.
Mary also was, just from what I was reading, again, in this, the more recent biography, the Estelle Paranque one, was saying how there was sort of talks between the de Guises and Spain about maybe marrying to Don Carlos, and Catherine just pulled every influential thing she had. Her daughter was there, right? Yeah. So Catherine just kind of like messed up those negotiations as well, because she was just like, I don't want the de Guises. I don't want Mary there. I don't want the de Guises to have power there. She's just like, I want the de Guises.
The de Guises aligned with Spain will make the Catholic League thing that we're still not at yet. That's the next king of France.
So this is where so it's all, a lot of backroom negotiations, but Catherine just kind of like being like, she wanted Mary in Scotland because that was kind of the least powerful place where Mary could be.
Yeah. Oh, for the de Guises, she didn't care about Mary at all. Mary was a blip.
Catherine wanted Mary gone because that meant the de Guises would be gone.
It would reduce their influence.
Yes, exactly.
You can't make the de Guises gone, no matter how hard she tried, and no matter how much she may have wanted to, and no matter how many people whose lives would have been saved.
Fair. Good distinction. But yeah, so this is where Mary Queen of Scots, God knows how many episodes I'm going to talk about her, but this is where she, when she was Queen of France, well, and also had Francis not died. If she had had a child with Francis, everything would have changed. But she hadn't.
That would be great as well.
And the de Guises, like she was useful to them when she was Queen of France. But now that she's not, they're kind of like, okay, Plan B, like.
And they forget about her.
Yeah, absolutely.
They forget she. Okay, you're no longer useful. You're dead to me.
Yeah.
And she goes home and she's entirely at the John Knox, the Douglases, like every political power player in Scotland, she's entirely ill-equipped to deal with them because she was raised on French politics.
Yeah, and she just didn't have the support of this powerful family that had been supporting her when she was in France. So for her, in terms of Mary Queen of Scots, like there's kind of like her life in France and then her life after, and it's wildly different. But
it took a while to build a power base in a place she had never been.
So let's see. Here's what I wrote. The next several years saw more battles between the Huguenots and the French royal family, between the Huguenots and the Catholics, with lots of battles and bloodshed along the way. After one battle too many, Catherine changed her policy regarding the Huguenots. So from 1568 onwards, she set about destroying them rather than allowing them freedom of religion. Because,
At the end of the day, she's still Catholic.
And the de Guises were still de Guising.
Well, and the Bourbons were a genuine threat.
Yeah.
Like the de Guises are a threat, but they have neutralized their one chance to take noble, like any sort of royal lineage by getting rid of Mary. So now the Bourbons, like, they do have royal lineage. They're Prince de Sangre. They're princes of the blood of a cadet branch, of a legitimate cadet branch, not a Jean de la Motte cadet branch.
Yeah.
So now the Bourbons are a bigger problem than the de Guises.
Right. So what does Catherine do? She's like, well, what if I marry my youngest daughter, Margot, to a Bourbon?
What could possibly go wrong?
So I have done an entire episode about Queen Margot. So like, I'll tell you what happens, but if you want to like dive into that, I did, who knows, 2 hours of talking about that before.
And if you want the world's most chaotic episode of Vulgar Peace history on the Patreon, we also watched Queen Margot there, and my poor husband had to watch just the end.
Yeah, Queen Margot at the end of both her story in life and the movie. Well, the movie was also fan fiction based, but legend has it that Margot kept the severed head of her executed lover and carried it around with her. And the movie, spoiler, ends with her taking that head and getting into a carriage and just driving off with a little head on her lap.
And my poor husband sitting on the couch eating a salad going, what's going on? Why did she give him money? Why does she have a head? Because he also relies on me to interpret French history and German history for him.
I mean, that's quite a moment to walk into any movie. So here's what happened, just like briefly. So Catherine was her youngest daughter, Margot, who we've talked about before, but of all of her children, Margot was the best one. Margot was the smartest. She also, like in terms of health, the longest lived, the least sickly. She was also beautiful. And she's also the one who's the most similar to her mother in terms of just intelligence.
She also thought for herself.
Yes.
She was least dependent on her mother as well.
And that's why her mother liked her the least. So she decides to marry her Catholic daughter to Henry of Navarre, who's the son of Antoine of Navarre from before. And so this is like a Catholic marrying a Huguenot. It's kind of like, I don't know, it's like, let's solve racism by, having a mixed race baby. It's just like, that's not anything to do with anything. So Henry of Navarre's mother is Jeanne d'Albret, who is a force of nature herself. She has sort of Catherine de' Medici vibes. She's a very powerful woman who potentially was murdered by Catherine via poison gloves, which is probably not true, but is a great story.
I want it to be true. Like, I want Catherine to be taking out, but if she's taking out anybody, she's taking out the de Guises. Like, I'm sorry. If that woman was genuinely going around poisoning people, the de Guises would have been gone a long time ago.
Yeah. So the rumor has it that Catherine, I think, gave a pair of gloves to Henry of Navarre's mother, Jeanne d'Albret. Jeanne put on the gloves, and then in sort of like a Fredegund-inspired shelf-stable poison situation, she then died of poison hands. But this is, again, that's a rumor that came out later where people had reasons to vilify Catherine and to make the Bourbons sound like cool people.
Yeah, she woke up the next morning with a fever. So, obviously she died of poisoning.
And obviously it was poison gloves from Catherine. So Henry of Navarre's mother died like shortly before the wedding. Then they had the wedding, and because it was this wedding of like the King of Navarre and this Princess of France, so kind of everybody came to town. Everyone was in Paris. All the Huguenots were there. All the Catholics were there. It's a powder keg to begin with. It's these people who have been like murdering each other for decades, all in town to go to the same wedding. And then what happened, and no one knows what really triggered this, but they all started killing each other.
The de Guises triggered this.
Okay, yes. Who knows? Like, could it be these men who continuously massacre Huguenots?
Just go around looking for excuses to start massacres against Huguenots.
So this is called the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And this occurred a few days after the royal wedding, like while the royal wedding partying was still going on. And so it started in the castle, and then it spread around to Paris. And then it spread from Paris out into the countryside for the next several months, and the massacre was not it was not equal amounts of people being killed. So all the important Huguenot leaders were all murdered. Huguenots were just being murdered all over France. It's the de Guises' dream come true, truly. Just Huguenots being murdered.
It's everything they'd prepared for their whole entire lives.
They're just like, finally, the race war that we wanted.
It's like, well, we can't be in charge. We're just going to kill everybody, okay?
Yes. And so, what was Catherine's involvement in this? Like, we don't know, but she was certainly blamed for it.
She wasn't able to stop it.
Who could?
Like, that's her role was she wasn't able to stop it. She wasn't able to make either side, like the side that was being killed, she couldn't make them stop being killed, and she couldn't make the de Guises stop killing them. So,
and I'm not sure how it ended. I think everyone just was dead or just too tired to keep going.
And whatever remained of the leadership ran away. I think to Denmark.
Yeah, the Huguenots ran away. Yeah,
which is how how Calvin ended up in Denmark.
Was he French?
Or not Denmark. Netherlands.
So next Wednesday, is going to be the Catherine de Medici Part 3, the finale. It's the Return of the Jedi vibes, which for her, I guess, is just not the return of the de Guises, because they're always kind of there. It's the conclusion of the Catherine de Medici series within a series. She's going to get her score. So, I mean, you have to come back for that. Anyway, so again, next Wednesday is going to be Catherine de Medici Part 3. On Friday, like every Friday for the foreseeable future, there's going to be these bonus super special episodes as well. So just like I'm serving content, I'm giving you lols, and we're having a good time. And I'm not losing my voice, even though I'm recording 10,000 things, including. So this past Monday, I was a guest on the Worst Bestsellers podcast, which was a thing that I manifested using The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, a book that the Worst Bestsellers have previously talked about. So if you don't know that podcast, The Worst Bestsellers, it's been around for like several years. And it was one of my big comfort podcasts, just binging the whole archive early in like 2020 and like during COVID era, where I felt like I was working at home by myself. And I'm just like, I really need the sounds of people talking. And so that was a podcast I listened to. And I really developed a strong parasocial relationship with the hosts of that show, Kate and Renata. And so a while ago on Instagram, I was doing an Ask Me Anything, and somebody asked, what's your dream podcast collaboration? And I said, Worst Bestsellers. And they saw it and they invited me on, and honestly, dream come true. And so the book that we talked about on Worst Bestsellers podcast is The Other Boleyn Girl, which it's a wide-ranging discussion of a book about which I have various, very strong feelings. So anyway, I love the Worst Bestsellers podcast. I think you'll enjoy it. And if you just want to like follow me and see what else I've been doing, listen to the Worst Bestsellers podcast this week because I was on it. Also, it's April. We're getting towards the end of April. I've been doing this fundraiser all month, Tits Out for Trans Lives. Tits Out for Trans Rights, Tits Out for Trans Everything, frankly. If you go to vulgarhistory.com/donate, all the stuff is there. But basically, I'm raising money for the Trevor Project, which is an American organization that is trans affirming, and also just supporting LGBTQ people. And then I also am selling merch that was designed by non-binary artist Jan Jupitter. It's beautiful merch. It's unbelievably, it's better than I could have imagined. Jan knocked it out of the park. It's an image of the Chevalier d'Eon, iconic trans woman we talked about last season. She was the one who was the spy. She like blackmailed the king. It was an iconic story. Anyway, so the artwork is the Chevalier d'Eon mid-lunging. She's one of her famous fencing battles wearing her iconic black dress ensemble. And then it says, we have always been here, in the sense of trans people have always been here. Like, anyway, there's so much shitty stuff happening in the world, and there's especially a lot of shitty stuff happening right now in terms of trans rights and things. And so I am doing this fundraiser. So anyway, if you go to vulgarhistory.com/donate, there's a link there to donate to the Trevor Project. And then all the proceeds from sales of the Chevalier d'Eon merch, I'm going to be donating to Point of Pride, which is another American organization that is trans affirming. And if you this month are donating money to another trans affirming organization, there's a form at vulgarhistory.com/donate. So you can just let me know what you donated and to who. And that way, at the end of the month, I can announce how much money we raised and for where, and I can shout out the people who donated who want to be shouted out. So anyway, that's all happening. You can follow me on Instagram at Vulgar History Pod. You can follow me on TikTok at Vulgar History. And I have my Patreon at patreon.com/AnnFosterWriter. And that's where if you pledge $1 a month, you get early ad-free access to all of the episodes. And if you pledge at least $5 or more a month, you get the early ad-free access to episodes as well as bonus episodes, like one that I believe will have just posted with special guest Alison Epstein. And we're talking about Australian bush ranges. And I unleashed my heretofore unheard Australian accent. And it's a really good time. Anyway, that's on Patreon. We also do Vulgar Peace Theater. We've recently talked about the movie Corsage, which is the Empress Sisi movie. Empress Sisi, you know it. That's Lana's person. So it was a good discussion. Again, Allison, Lana, and I do those on Patreon. And you can listen to that if you pledge at least $5 or more. And actually, there's a new thing. Even if you just want to hear a little bit, on Patreon, there's a thing where you can get like a 5-minute. You can hear the first 5 minutes of all these bonus episodes on Patreon. So you can just if you need just a little bit more of my voice, besides twice weekly episodes and other things, you can get a little preview of the bonus episode about the bush ranges and also about the Corsage episode of Vulgar Peace Theater. Anyway, thank you all for listening. Next Wednesday, is going to be Catherine de' Medici finale. And then on Fridays, there's going to be a series of really fantastic bonus episodes, conversations with authors. And until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is hosted, written, and researched by Ann Foster and edited by Christina Lumagi.
Talmor, Sheshin Marachi. Talmor is my home. My family have worked the land for generations. My gran says the island does not belong to us, but we belong to the island. And we must be ready, for a great evil is coming, and death follows with it.
Listen and subscribe to the latest season of Undertow, The Harrowing, a Storyglass production presented by Realm, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, this is Rob Benedict.
And I am Richard Spate. We were both on a little show you might know called Supernatural.
It had a pretty good run, 15 seasons, 327 episodes.
And though we have seen, of course, every episode many times, we figured, hey, now that we're wrapped, let's watch it all again.
And we can't do that alone, so we're inviting the cast and crew that made the show along for the ride. We've got writers, producers, composers, directors, and we'll of course have some actors on as well, including some certain guys that played some certain pretty iconic brothers.
It was kind of a little bit of a left field choice in the best way possible.
The note from Kripke was, he's great, we love him, but we're looking for a really intelligent Duchovny type.
With 15 seasons to explore, it's going to be the road trip of several lifetimes. So please join us and subscribe to Supernatural then and now.